And we're all very glad to be back here in person, those of us who are here. And James will be joining us. There is James. James will be joining us online. We were just talking before we came up onto the stage. We think you're scaring people a little bit with the title of today's session. Authoritarianism plus technology equals the end of freedom. It's a little bit depressing to have as the last thing before our lunch break, but we're going to rise to the challenge. We're going to embrace it, and we're going to deal with what Pauline Neville-Jones in one of the earlier sessions this morning called the challenge of standing up for our values. And this is something that is obviously very much in the news at the moment. There's a lot of concern about Russia, and we've been hearing that in various sessions. There are some long-standing concerns around China, but it's not just those challenges. The G7 ministers meeting at the weekend made one of their themes for their discussion making our democracies more resilient. And they noted that our democracies, indeed democracies all around the world, are facing increased challenges, increased pressure from outside, but also from within. So I hope we're going to have an opportunity also to talk about some of the challenges that we have within our societies and our democracies. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to organize this in a very straightforward way. I'm going to ask each of the panelists, first of all, to say how they see the problem, the scale and the nature of the challenge. And then we're going to come back for a second round to ask them each in turn about, from their perspective, their particular perspective and their experience, what we can and should do about that challenge. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some questions from the floor. Let's kick off with the first round on what exactly is the scale of the challenge. Kersti, if I may.
Thank you, and greetings to our Ukrainian friends. Maybe they are hearing us, that we do not know. They could be hearing us. And no, technology is not going to take away our freedom. Like axe is not used to kill only people, it's also used to cut trees and do valuable stuff. Similarly, the newer technologies work the same way. Take Ukraine today. Ukraine has a comprehensive e-governance model which is called Trumpita. I know it because it's an Estonian development together with Ukrainians. It's better than ours because it's simply newer. And on this system, during the war, I heard 5,000 new companies under Ukrainian jurisdiction have been created because people can remain Ukrainians and operating in Ukrainian legal space with the help of technology. See, their freedom to operate is far bigger than it would otherwise be. So this is a good example. So overall, I'm very convinced that just because we are living a kind of wild, tough, nasty, dirty middle age in the digital sphere right now, like we did in the European Middle Age, you know, where people could steal, nobody could catch them, people could not be recognized because passports were not common, and then the strong autocrats told people, we will regulate all this, you lose all your freedoms, but you're safe.
Yes. That's an upbeat view. Kai, you've spent a lot of time thinking about an alternative model of the use of technology in China. What are your experiences and what lessons you draw about the kind of challenge that it presents there?
I'm very happy that we started with this upbeat note and this optimistic a couple of optimistic ideas and sentences by Kersti, because her country obviously represents a lot of the things that need to be done and a good model of how we should go along in these new digital times. Now, I unfortunately have to play the role of the messenger of the bad news here because I spent well, more than half of my life studying China, living in China. I was 17 years the correspondent for a newspaper in China. And what I witnessed there in my past 7-8 years under Xi Jinping was really stunning. This country, this China, has turned into a completely new creature. This is not the China that we actually grew up with and that we knew anymore. So the China we're seeing today, maybe let me tell you a little bit about this, what actually technology can do if you use it to reinvent dictatorship with it, to reinvent dictatorship digitally. So in China, we're talking about a country that has quadrupled the number of its security surveillance cameras in the space of 3 years. We're speaking about a government that actually stakes its rise and its survival on artificial intelligence and big data and information technology like no second government on the planet, actually. And we're speaking about the Communist Party that has created the world's largest re-education camp system and labor camp system, currently based also on AI and big data solutions. Of course, I'm speaking about the camps in Xinjiang, where more than 1 million people, Muslims mostly, have been brought to. And we had the Vice Minister of Technology in Beijing in 2017 saying artificial intelligence is so great because it helps us already today to know who actually will be the terrorists of tomorrow. And of course, he was speaking of people who didn't even know themselves that they would be those people. And this is exactly what we're seeing in China, in Xinjiang. It is actually a high-tech example for predictive policing experiment. Xinjiang is the high-tech version of Cultural Revolution. And so certainly what China has done is it has made us say goodbye to the illusion that new technology will spread freedom to every corner of the world. You remember all the tech prophets that told us authoritarian states couldn't survive because of, first it was like satellite TV, then it was mobile phones, later the internet, social media, and so on. China is really a counterexample. So what Xi Jinping is doing, he's reinventing dictatorship. He's reinventing it digitally. He's doing it at a time where China, again, is stepping into the world, is actually trying to become more active internationally, is trying to shape the international order also according to its image. So that really makes it a challenge for us. And maybe just let me sum up what's happening there, and we can speak about it a little bit more later if you want. That what we're seeing there is that, of course, there was always repression, but the repression is getting much smarter. What we're actually seeing now is the return of totalitarianism, you know, in digital guise there. China was always a dictatorship, but for many years, party has ceded control to society, to economy, to businesses and stuff. Now we're seeing a return of totalitarianism, and it's a much smarter totalitarianism because it comes in the digital way. It's all about internalization of control. It's actually also about making the people accomplices of the system, because of course everybody of you has traveled to China knows that when you step out of the plane there, it doesn't look like an Orwellian, socialist barrack state like the one Stalin used to run or Mao Zedong used to run. It looks like a very colorful country. It looks like a wild, adventurous, and it looks actually like the center of consumerism and commerce, sometimes a more sort of commercially active and consumer society than even the American one. So I would say what's happening there is actually a very smart and colorful mix of George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. And of course, Aldous Huxley was he wrote his dystopian novel based actually on American capitalism, not on Stalin's socialism. So a very smart mix where, not only do you control people by sort of brutal repression and force, but you actually control them with entertainment and commerce and stuff, and you give them the illusion of freedom. One of the most smart sentences Huxley actually wrote, and of course that's also true for our society, is that it's a very easy thing for a tyrant to make people into slaves. The trick is, to actually control a population. I'm now reading this quote so that I get it right. Control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. Slaves not even realizing they're slaves. And I think this kind of technology used in the way the regime in Beijing uses it helps a lot to that goal.
So a slightly less optimistic picture of a different society where there's misuse and abuse of technology. James, you're joining us from NATO, where you've been chained to your desk and we're unable to make it in person. What is NATO's perhaps security perspective on this question?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and for the flexibility of having me here. It's a little bit busy at the headquarters, so it's hard to get away. But I really wanted to participate in this discussion. I'd like to stress whatever I say is not going to be NATO's view, but I'll give you my view from the division that is responsible for this. And it's nice to speak third because I clearly get the deciding vote between optimistic and pessimistic. You won't be surprised that if you're looking at it from a NATO point of view, I'd say the general view is more on the pessimistic side. And I'd like to just build on the conversation that we've just heard. So obviously, any analysis of China would recognize what we just heard. And we just heard about Xinjiang, and Xinjiang is the sort of the epicenter, test bed of the integration of technologies to control a population, and that includes, forcibly or insisting on the installation of apps that monitor everybody's activities. If you're too slow to go to work, they want to find out where you were. If you use too much energy in your house, they wonder if there's somebody else there. So this is really the test bed. That technology, that sort of surveillance technology, has been rolled out and is increasingly being rolled out across China. For example, in Shenzhen, and it's called, in its greater manifestation, City Brain, which fuses all the sensors, all the cameras that are available, from people's, doorbells to cameras on police officers to self-driving cars, to know what everybody's doing, and then of course you assign to them a social score based also on their social media activity. So China is sort of the epicenter of this. And I think everybody recognizes that. I think we also have to look at what's going on in Russia. In 2019, the regime ran an experiment to shut the internet off from the rest of the world. I think we're going to move in that direction. And they have imposed by law that all digital traffic has to pass through the Kremlin's digital censor. And you can see that where there might have been protests in Russia in the past, these are very easily controlled now. They know what everybody is thinking or saying online. They can control it. They can pick the leaders out. And so when people look at Russia, the use of technology has, at the very least, controlled their behavior, including in the current situation. And in many ways, it's controlled what they know. Of course, all opposition has been eliminated, or at least effective opposition has been eliminated using technology. But that's these two big countries. What I'd like to add to this is there are two more levels to that we need to be concerned about. One is that this technology is now increasingly being exported to and used by autocracies around the world. And this is driven principally by China, which is offering surveillance in a box. And that means cameras, artificial intelligence and big data exploitation and how to use it. Technology that includes facial recognition, gait recognition, like how you walk, all of that is fused. They are using Chinese companies to do it. Often it is offered for free. They offer technicians to provide it. They offer training to technicians and to autocracies in China on how to use this surveillance technology. And the results are quantifiable. And I've done the work, or at least I've fused research from many other organizations, and all of this is public. Basically, what's happened since 2000 or so, when all of this technology started to become widely available, is autocracies have started to last a whole lot longer. So until the year 2000, autocracies around the world lasted about 10 years. So from World War II to the year 2000. Since 2000, that number has started to climb back up. And now autocracies last on average 25 years. And the autocracies that use surveillance technologies and all of these supported technologies last the longest. They are also the most effective at shortening or eliminating protests. So you can measure all of this, and Freedom House gives very good numbers for those who want to go look at it. So what is happening? Surveillance technology is quantifiably reinforcing autocracies and helping them grow in number. And then the third thing that's happening is that the autocracies are working together increasingly in the technical bodies in the UN system to try to put their standards in place, their standards, so technical standards, for example, for 6G. So if the International Telecommunications Union chooses a Chinese standard, well, that means Chinese companies and everything that goes with it will be in the lead to provide those technologies around the world. But it also means in the bodies that set standards when it comes to personal freedoms, to human rights, to what internet freedom should be, when they organize themselves to fight for those standards and for leadership positions in those organizations, we, the democratic communities, are on the back foot. So I have lots of ideas, and I'm sure many people do, about what to do about it. But I think we do need to recognize that there is strategic competition going on when it comes to technology, and we better get in the game.
Good. So now we're going to go around again. And in the light of some of those challenges, and I'm very glad, James, you mentioned the challenge of standard setting there, because it sounds a bit technical and a bit dusty, and it happens in organizations called things like the ITU and WIPO that not everybody's heard of, but it is a key front line in thinking about this. We're going to go back round and try and discuss some of the things that we think should be done to deal with some of these challenges and tip us back towards a more optimistic view of the role of technology in our societies. And then we're going to come to the audience and take some questions. So start thinking about issues you'd like to raise with this excellent panel. Kersti.
I am afraid that our public is getting ludite now about technologies if we take this view. But frankly, for every example given here, we can give any positive example, like Ukrainians using open information to find and identify rapists, murderers, and marauders, and so on, so on. Thing is, Stalin found a way to send about 7% of my nation's population to Gulag at that time's technological level. And it's true at every technological level. We are now piling up weapons in Ukraine to help them win this 20th century war, which is going on in Ukraine, not based on technologies. Everybody has been so surprised, why are there so few cyber attacks? In fact, there are, but well, they are not at the forefront of people's mind if your infrastructure actually gets bombed and destroyed physically. Also, you wouldn't waste your cyber capabilities if you anyway are going to bomb a power plant. So indeed, technology can always be used, good ways and bad ways, and autocrats will use it to suppress their people. Why are they suppressing their people? To be free, to also, use their economic might and power on the surrounding sphere of nations. This has been ages long this way, and this kind of regime once overextends it. I think we are now seeing what Russia is doing, exactly this overextension. It is doing it because it can do it, because it can suppress the public opinion. But even within the Soviet Union, under strict censorship, somehow I managed to read Estonian expat newspapers. And I am sure, similarly today, Russian people who want to find information are using exactly the same technology to inform themselves, to keep in contact, and, for example, keep smuggling deported Ukrainians back towards European side, which is going on daily. We see the results there. So technology always works good way and bad way. And now we have to establish, of course, since you mentioned regulation, what is then the good way? For example, GDPR. Fantastic stuff. GDPR would never allow any government to gather data about people, let's say their origin, their parents' income levels, whether their parents are behaving legally or illegally, or themselves behaving legally and illegally, draw conclusions and act preemptively. For example, telling these people cannot, serve in army or work in police because we think their background will lead to misbehavior. We don't allow this kind of thing to happen in a free world. Free world governments do legally restrict and limit. In Estonian e-government, which is up and running for 20 years already, government has promised citizens it does not look at the data of the people without the permission of the people. It can technically, of course, but it has said it's not going to do so. It does offer proactive services And for proactive services, there is some conclusions drawn from different parts of the data. For example, you are entitled to get a top-up to your pension. For that, we need to know you live alone, because heating cost is high for single pensioners, and we are paying you pension anyway. So you don't even have to apply for a service. Do databases, compare the data, and offer the service. Pay out the money to a retired person. So this is a proactive service. But proactive services also need to be developed this way that you respect people's privacy and basic principles of having control over your own data. This is extremely important that we set the legal space right. And if we also think now less of a kind of technology and more about hybrid and social media related risks, there as well. I mean, we have this long problem which we know you cannot do anti-propaganda because propaganda and anti-propaganda, they are brothers. Therefore, you try to, fight propaganda by telling truthful information. Similarly, for social media, we need to establish rules. Legal space is what determines how free world wants to police, if you wish. Like we police street space, we police the digital space similarly. And what is the most important element in this kind of how we police street space? We know who is who. People have passports when they go to notary offices or I don't know, agree to have a SIM card in a telco office. Or get married, exactly. In digital space, sphere, we need to drive anonymity out of this space. That's why in Europe we have now the right for every European Union citizen to have a digital ID. But digital IDs are Web 2 tools. Web 3 tools might be far more efficient and effective, helping us to crowdsource this kind of information to control misbehavior. Similarly, like if somebody misbehaves on the street, we do not always call the police. We sometimes tell them that this is not nice and they remedy their behavior. So driving anonymity out, knowing who did what to whom when, is what we do on street space. And we need to arrive at the same spot in the digital space. And we need to plan for all kinds of technological levels in advance. Similarly, like all technological levels globally have always been used in the past. And not to confuse the fact that we have autocrats and democrats with the fact that technology can never be autocratic all by itself. It isn't. We have to design it to be like that, but we have also to set legal limitations so that we cannot design it to be like that.
Excellent. And thank you for underlining the role of rules and regulation and legal order, because I think we might come back to that. But you painted a slightly dystopian picture of one model of the use and abuse of technology. How do we deal with that challenge, the challenge of that model, and indeed the attempt to export that model?
Yeah, I mean, speaking about dystopia, I mean, this is something that's happening right now, right? This is dystopia, living dystopia. We're experiencing it live. But again, I'm really, really grateful that Kersti Kaljulaid is here because obviously, you know, after I left China by the end of 2018, my conclusion to all this, for the last 2 years, all I had done was researching the Chinese social credit system and Chinese facial recognition startups, voice recognition startups, and seeing all this dystopia in action. Of course, my conclusion was not, you know, now let's trash technology and let's get rid of artificial intelligence. If China is reinventing dictatorship with technology and digitally, we have to reinvent democracy. That's the point. And this is why the first things I did afterwards was trying to find examples. The first thing I did was I went to Taiwan, which is an amazing example. You have this cyber minister, Audrey Tang there, who is doing a lot in digitalization of government and actually, you know, making democracy more transparent, more inclusive. And actually then I went to Estonia. And you might not remember it, but I have interviewed you twice, actually. And all I can say is learn from Estonia. So the thing is now here, obviously there's several levels that get a little bit mixed together. You know, there was a time when we actually thought we could change countries like Russia and China, you know. There was a time when we thought capitalism would change China. We thought the internet would change China. Suddenly it's the other way around. Suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where China is changing capitalism and the internet. And the point we're at now is like, of course, we will not change China. This is up to the Chinese. But the point we're at now is we have to look after ourselves now. And this is where we can do something. We have to look, this is where we can stand up, you know, speaking about the norms and values that you brought up in the beginning. We have to debate where are they. We have to debate where are the red lines, you know, that influence operations cross, where maybe freedom of speech and these things are actually being actively influenced by Russian or Chinese operations. Internationally, what we just heard about, you know, the export, we have the export of all these surveillance technologies and stuff and smart city concept. Actually, Huawei, you know, the Chinese telecom provider that was supposed to also refurbish all our 5G networks all over Europe before something was done legally there by the national parliaments. Huawei is the biggest smart city exporter on the planet, you know. But then, you know, we have to realize the problem, we have to see what's happening, and then we have to ask ourselves, what can we do? Like, you know, what did we, you know, if Huawei goes to Lagos in Nigeria, and it goes to Karachi in Pakistan, actually 2 cities that have bought the smart city concept, you know, if it goes there, and actually tries to sell its concepts. And it says, look, we have these different levels, we have these different modules, you can buy our whatever wastewater system regulation, you can buy the traffic solution, AI powered, but we would really advise you, you know, take also on top, take our security, surveillance, facial recognition, artificial intelligence powered, Skynet, how they call it, take this as well. And we will guarantee you that overnight, your problem of criminality, you know, crimes will reduce substantially. And they're right, they will, you know. They will not have tackled the root problem of the cause of, you know, social injustice, poverty. But because, you know, if you're living in a city like this and you can be sure that every square inch of the city is actually being surveyed and your face is in the database, then you probably will not, you know, steal the bag in the bus or pull out a gun against someone. So what have we done for these, you know, countries in between China and the industrialized world, you know, Central Asia, Africa, South America? This is one thing. And the other thing is, yeah, what do we do at home? And I completely agree, you know, besides all the black stuff I've said, we can do a lot if we realize it, and then if we summon the will and the courage to stand up. And I have to say, this is actually something that left me a little bit stunning in the beginning, not in Estonia or in other countries, but in Germany, my home country, after I came back, after 25 years living in China and in Turkey, half democratic, half authoritarian state, coming back, witnessing 3 years ago and in the past 3 years, witnessing the people there. You know, I'm not speaking about these 20% right-wing populist movements who scream about the decline of democracy, but witnessing the other 80%, the good people, the democratic people, the people who love Europe and democracy, and witnessing them in a completely, I don't know, resignating, fatalistic, you know, and me coming back from China, having witnessed China for so long, of course, all the black developments, but at the same time coming back with a 100% conviction, our system actually is the better one, and we have something to fight for, we have something to be enthusiastic about. Where is the enthusiasm? Let's do it. Yeah.
Yes. James, so NATO. How is NATO going to help reinvent and reinforce our democracies and generate that enthusiasm?
Yeah, well, there's plenty of enthusiasm on that panel and for me too. So that's great. And actually, I think here I don't have to come down on one side or the other. I think what we've already heard leads directly into what I'd like to say. I think there are at least 6 things that I would suggest we could do, and very much along the lines of reinforcing the positive vision that we've heard. One is, and this is exactly where Kai just ended, we have to recognize that there is strategic competition for our values when it comes to our political systems and when it comes to our security, and they're all underpinned by tech, and in some cases, turbocharged by technology, and we have to fight for those. That vision, that positive vision that we can see and that needs to be reinforced and defended. Second point is, I think we have to not make it worse, meaning our governments need to monitor the export of the technologies, the surveillance cameras, the AI, the big data, the facial recognition, the gate recognition. It's not just Chinese technology. It's our companies that are also exporting this. And they do it for financial reasons. So our governments need to kind of oversee this and make sure that higher concerns are taken into account. Third is what we've just been discussing, which is to work in international fora to defend those values and the technical standards on which they are based. And so we're trying to help in that regard at NATO. NATO is not a place where we're going to decide what allies do in other fora, but it's a useful platform, a transatlantic platform for the US and Canada to sit with the European countries and principally allies to say, okay, this meeting is coming up in that body and that issue is going to be raised. What do we all think? What is it that we should do to defend our values and our interests in this way? Then next point, fourth point, we need to set a good balance for ourselves. And I think both previous speakers have talked about that. It's not that we don't use facial recognition technology. We do. So my Danish friend who I was with last night, we were talking about this, and he said, if you go into a football stadium in Copenhagen, there's facial recognition technology, and hooligans are picked out of the crowd before they ever make it into the stadium. And people like that. But then the data is erased. Exactly as in the case of Estonia, there's responsible use of data, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we have to do is ensure transparency and effective democratic control. So set a good democratic standard at home. Fifth point, and Kai just mentioned this as well, we have to offer an alternative. I've talked to leaders in African countries and in some Latin American countries, the leaders in the government who are making decisions on what to acquire in terms of technology. And what they have said is they're very open. We know the risks, they say, but this is good and it's cheap and we need it. So if you, the West, can offer us an alternative that we can afford, even a slightly more expensive one, but that meets the same technical standards, we'd take it because we don't want all the risks of getting Chinese technology. And I would add that these Chinese city-in-a-box offers include, in many cases, that the data that's being collected in the African country or the Latin American country is going to Beijing. It's not just going to the capital, it's going back to Beijing for their own use. They don't want that either, but we are not offering alternatives. And 5G is a good example of how, the EU or Europe has a couple of companies, Swedish and Finnish, that are pretty good at it. North America has none. And of course, the Chinese model from Huawei is good, subsidized by the Chinese government, but highly capable. So offer an alternative. Then the final point is to protect our own ecosystem. We need to invest in our startups, in our companies. So we've just set up in NATO what we call DIANA, a Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. I did not come up with this acronym, but I respect whoever did because it's pretty good. And basically what we're going to do is set challenges for the startup community, bring them through a program, help them to understand what we need, help them to find financing from trusted sources, help them with rapid acquisition so that they can get quickly to market, help them have access to all 30 NATO markets, not just one, help them to understand when they're at risk from malign acquisition. And then alongside that, we're just negotiating now the establishment of an innovation fund. So we're going to have €1 billion run as an investment fund to invest in deep tech and in startups. So there's going to be money for it as well. Another way of stimulating our own industry so that they're competitive with others. So these are 6 ideas that I wanted to put on the table.
Thank you. That's really clear. Kersti, you and I actually happened to be in Washington last week, seeing various American friends after a bit of a gap. Do you think transatlantic cooperation on these issues is is strong, as good as it needs to be?
I think we are all now realizing that in this geopolitical chess game, West versus Rest, we need to step up, but we can only step up together. And for me, the feeling from Washington is that we want to bring you together, people from Europe, people from Quad, people from other regions where they respect democracies and want to remain democracies, and free nations, not serving with their data the bad powers of this world. But the thing is, we for quite long have left voids. I mean, it's like on the chess game. If there is an empty space, you have your adversary stepping onto it. And this is something which we have to, play better. And it's not only in technology. Look who is finally getting the blame for 400 million being starving now globally because there is war in Ukraine. I think we have to win this war, but we have to do far more than we are right now doing to make sure that we do not finally are blamed for this problem. So it's not only linked to technology. But to technology and transatlantic issue, I do agree that we need to make sure that, and since we are now talking not about content but carrier for some time, carrier service can be trusted, that the technology only does what it tells us it is doing, and we know for sure that it's not doing anything else. So this is what is trusted connectivity. Also, trusted connectivity is that the service is not withheld to achieve anybody's political objectives. A good analog is GPS. My children actually think it's a kind of a natural force, just something which surrounds the world. Why? Because it is controlled and run by a democracy. The level to, from which they will be ready to withhold the service to achieve their objectives is sky high. We've never seen it. At least not, on a large scale. I'm sure there have been cases in the military zones where the service has been withheld. This is what we need, trusted connectivity. How we achieve it? Well, we have a wonderful body called OECD, which happens to be led right now by somebody who comes from a Quad country. And they are promoting the blue dot as the standard for making sure that our carrier service is indeed safe and secure. Europe wants to have its own standards, and I don't frankly mind at all whether we have blue dot as a general standard, blue dot, European standards, some third standard which come loosely together under trusted connectivity principles, but we must also be able to tell those countries who are anyway only followers of on technology, who are anyway buying either from Huawei or from Ericsson, we don't know. How can they today decide even what is safe for them? It's very easy for them to analyze, but if you are a small middle-income country, you do not do this analysis yourself, hence enable to, involve the free world in making sure that we are freer globally. And in more places, we must help by standardizing, by making sure that we have these standards. And indeed, I believe that right now we have really good cooperation also between EU and America in helping to resolve these issues. We have a Trade and Technology Council established, which I think will verge rather towards technology than trade. And to something which was said by our NATO colleague, I'm extremely proud that, I remember 2016, there were me, João Cavinho, then Portuguese defense minister, some people from NATO, Mircea Dianu, for example, Jens Stoltenberg himself, who realized that we have to start pushing for bringing private sector on board for our defense and security needs. And we've been pushing, and as always on multilateral scene, I've seen it before in my life, having worked also in EU institution, initially it seems like things are not moving, and then suddenly they start to go somewhere. Now it is kind of very clear to everybody that while China still controls technological development, like nothing happens unless they know, like during when nuclear weapons were developed, nothing happened so that governments did not know. Then in the free world, much more investment and technology development happens in private sector. Hence, not to despair that we do not know what is going on, but to involve. And this is exactly what Diana is doing. What a beautiful name for a beautiful initiative.
Right. If anyone in the audience wants to take this opportunity to ask one of these excellent panelists a question, please, say it, gentleman here, introduce yourself very briefly and ask away.
Does it work? Okay. Michał Rakowski, Kosciuszko Institute. So, from what you said, there is a very clear picture that on the one hand we have the democratic camp, on the other hand we have the authoritarian camp. They are both working hard to establish a different model on the use of technology. The one is led by the US and the EU, the other one is led by China, obviously. But I wonder, you know, and this is what Kai has also addressed, and what James said at the beginning when he gave us the numbers that autocracy now lasts approximately 25 years. It's a huge difference from what we knew during the Cold War, for example, right? When during the Cold War, when we faced an autocratic government, it was a temporary problem. So it seems, and they were far from being as capable as Beijing or Moscow is today. So what I'm getting at is first that we are witnessing a bifurcation or a divergence that might be a long-lasting challenge because the regime in North Korea and Beijing in Iran won't go away that quickly. That is the first thing. And then with the bifurcation, what about the rest? You know, the ones that are not exactly in our camp, the ones that are not yet in the other camp, and the ones that might, for example, not necessarily see it as a clear competition between a democracy and autocracy, but maybe between some form of efficiency or some more efficient model of governance that is empowered by technology that they might want to use, and they don't care that much about, you know, human rights or civic rights, or even if they care about human rights, not necessarily in the way we do or for our understanding. And especially given the fact that, you know, what we are witnessing is de-Westernization of the global order, and more societies from other parts of the world are getting more and more to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Another one? One more? Anybody? You've all been blasted into silence? Right, well, you actually managed to ask about 3 different questions. Bifurcation, is it inevitable? Is it desirable? If it is happening, what are we going to do to try and address countries that still have to choose? How do we export our values? I'm going to add to that, before we come back to the colleagues here, what do we do to reinforce our values at home? Because there are some challenges here. If we're going to compete in a marketplace of ideas and values, to persuade people who haven't yet chosen, perhaps, clearly, to come more in our direction than the alternative, then we have to be sure about our society, our model, and our values. And there are questions there, I think, which it's only fair that we recognize. I'm not saying they're insoluble, but how do we police freedom of expression in our societies in a way that is more persuasive? Kai, do you want to go first, and then we'll...
So 3 more questions in addition to those.
That's all right. You've got a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, first of all, thanks for the question. I think you were mentioning a very valid point there. That is something that people haven't noticed in the beginning, that China very early on under Xi Jinping, I would say from the year 2014, actually actively started framing the whole sort of rivalry as a new competition of systems. We are back in a competition of systems, and actually they are marketing their model of governance, their regime, as this sort of wise dictatorship, which is actually in the end, as you said, much more efficient, economically efficient than Western democracy, which is too slow, and there's too much argument, and it doesn't get anything done. And you know, as a German, they were always pointing to the Berlin airport, which took about, like, I don't know, 15, 20 years in the end to be built, while at the same time, Beijing built its airport in, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 record time. Yes, so this is something we really have to pay attention to. As I said, I mean, I think, you know, having lived in China for so long, I think we do have the more, not only the sort of, you know, ethically, morally, in terms of norms, sort of better systems. It somehow seems that human dignity isn't enough anymore. You have to sort of defend your system also in terms of efficiency. I would argue 1,000 times that our system in the end is more efficient, because dictatorships tends to step in all those traps that it lays for itself, and we will see a lot of these things also. You know, China is not this unstoppable sort of juggernaut that will roll over the rest of us. So this is one thing. And sorry,
how do we sell our model?
Yeah, that's also a very good point, because there's been a lot of talk in the past years and decades, actually, you know, that dictatorships aren't really good at soft power, which is true in many aspects, and yet China has managed this amazing feat with its sort of Silk Road, with the new Silk Road, of suddenly spreading a narrative across the globe, which, you know, if you poke into it, very often there are a lot of, you know, bubbles, and there's a lot of hot air, there's empty promises, and all those things. Still, there's also good things being done, there's some bad things being done, but the narrative is just amazing, and it's an example for something that the European Union, for all the good things it has done in the past years and decades, somehow doesn't seem to be able to do anymore, to create a good narrative, you know. People here, as I said, as I tried to describe before, people, my compatriots in Germany, my colleagues, some of my friends, they seem to have lost the imagination, actually, you know, that things have been different before, you know. We weren't always as rich and as democratic and as peaceful before, and they seem to have lost the power of imagination towards the fact that it can change that quickly again, you know. They completely. So how do we get out a new narrative? I mean, I always, when I speak about China to people, I sort of try to tell them, you know, to make it compulsory that every citizen of Germany actually should have a compulsory 6 months of life internship in China and experience for itself, and then come back with a newfound enthusiasm for democracy. But
I'll do James and come back to you. That might bring a whole new meaning to internship, of course. James.
A couple of thoughts when I recover from that bad joke. First, I do think we need to recognize that the Russian war on and in Ukraine has brought Russia and China substantially closer together. And, you know, there used to be this talk of, and maybe it was the case, that this was ad hoc and limited cooperation. But when China says, or when the two of them say, this is a no limits partnership now, I think we're seeing a lot of that in the Ukraine crisis, or the Russia war. I want to call it what it is, because what you see is China really amplifying Russian messages, voting against inquiries, etc. They're really aligning themselves right now with the Russians in an active way. And I think that that's really relevant when it comes to what Kai just said about the competition of systems. My view, I speak for NATO, I don't speak for NATO here, I speak for me. But I do think that we are entering a new level of cooperation between those two countries, and therefore a new level of competition of systems. And we need to kind of gird ourselves for that. What can we do about it? I think this point about narrative is very important. I think one of the interesting developments over the last 6 months, and particularly now, is actually that people are seeing that the systems in Russia and in China are not systems under which they want to live. So there is a flight of international people from Hong Kong because they don't want to do it. It is impossible for banks to get anyone to go to China anymore. The brain drain out of Russia is huge, the numbers of people who are leaving, and I don't expect them to go back. So I think there is actually a growing awareness that these systems have now reached a level in which if you have an option, you take it to not be there. And that's, I think, a positive step. I think another area in which there is a growing awareness, but where we can contribute, this is coming back to the question about the countries that are sort of debating which way to go, is simply to educate them, inform them about what trap lies behind, you know, what's inside the Trojan horse. And, you know, the Sri Lankans now, have really become very aware. It's not the only reason, but the debt trap they fell into by the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Well, there's this very similar trap hidden inside the offers of technology, including your dependence on them and the debt you have to them. And what I increasingly see is countries being aware of this and not wanting to walk into that trap. So again, if we provide information and then give alternatives, but we do it actively, we can help. And then the final point I would make is, and this comes back to what you were saying about our own models and going beyond what was already very usefully said about GDPR and other things. And that is that we need to have principles of responsible use in place for ourselves to offer a higher model. So we at NATO have agreed, the allies have agreed, principles of responsible use for artificial intelligence. We're going to do the same thing for autonomous weapons. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. One is it's the right thing to do. But second, because if we're going to have the private sector work with us, and it's 100% true that we need greater cooperation with industry. I really believe this. But it's the case that in China, for example, they have a policy called civil military fusion. The government, it's a law. The government has access to all the technology from all companies, all data that passes through Chinese servers or servers on Chinese territory. We don't have that. And you can see, for example, that some of our companies are a little bit hesitant about working with defense. You saw that with Google, where they didn't want to participate. The staff kind of revolted. If we can show the private sector that we have principles of responsible use for their technology, if they give it, sell it to us, then they're more comfortable working with us. And I've actually had this conversation with companies. The staffs can say, okay, we'll give you AI tech because we know how you're going to use it. So this has a benefit that is concrete and commercial and not just in terms of value. So these are some ideas.
That's great. Kersti, do you want to? You're getting the last word. Draw some strands together.
I think I'll try to keep it more on societal rather than technological level. You mentioned EU and whether it is the driver, for example, for our way of life. Frankly speaking, isn't and shouldn't be. EU is no straitjacket. EU is just a, well, let's say, difficult legal construct to allow the leaders or the participating nations to come together and agree how they resolve common issues and common problems. But within the EU and its regulatory straitjacket, like sometimes it is also called, you have Estonia, fully digital nation of 20 years already. You have France, fantastically protective about its labor market till last 3 years when they realized it's a problem, having it now liberalized. You have Germany with Hertz reforms 20 years back. You have Great Britain, which used, well, it's not anymore there, used to be there, but which opened its job market for Eastern European far quicker and so on. Thing is, there is no such thing like a free and democratic singular model. Doesn't exist. And this is its strength, because some of us will fit future better. We don't know who. But if we were all very similar, then none of us might actually one day fit the future better. And this is a strength of us, that we are varied and different, not the weakness of us. Autocratic regimes always end in one way because they fall in the same step. Somebody, one person, narrow body of persons, is deciding in autocratic system where they are going. It might fit the future, but if you make an error, then this error is also for you fatal, global. I mean, so you doesn't fit the future anymore. And normally, I mean, narrow decision-making processes do not lead to kind of decision-making which will fit the future. And this is precisely why these systems cannot be sustainable for long term, as was pointed out by discussion which we got, which inspired us to speak so nobody else can ask any questions anymore. Precisely. Cold War, indeed, it lasted 50 years, and we don't know how long the current Russian regime or Chinese regime will last. But similar problems are linked to that kind of life and not to our way of free life. So indeed, temporarily, you may see that you are gaining in efficiency. But in long term, your risks concentrate. And one day you're not able to sustain this way of life for future. Whereas in the freer world, we always adapt. We have, during the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, in more freer societies, created innovation for next generation society. And I am quite sure this will continue. Also, economically, I am quite sure that unfree nations cannot reach the level of high-income countries. Yes, you can do middle income, but for high income, you need such creativity to achieve productivity that only free people are able to do it. And that's why I'm quite sure that, I mean, finally, free world will prevail. Both for the reason it's simply nicer, both for the reason it's more varied, also it gives us more economic competence to go towards the future. So I am really not worried, and I don't want to make propaganda for EU, for democracy and so on. In addition, this is exactly what Russians think. Remember Belarus crisis. They said, this is West expanding its sphere of influence. Alternative, Russia is expanding its sphere of influence. We don't expand our sphere of influence. It's damn hard to get into that EU and NATO thing, as we all know, particularly here in this country, in my country. It's very hard to get in. But people, if they get to decide, tend to themselves kind of be drawn towards these free systems. And this is exactly the fatal error which Putin made, thinking of Belarus, as Belarus people are objects. They have no subjective will. And he made the same error in Ukraine. Why he thought he can conquer Ukraine with 170,000 soldiers when it took 70,000 to conquer Grozny? Precisely because they thought Ukrainian people do not care whether their president is Zelensky or Putin when they go and plant potatoes in the spring. He was wrong. He's always wrong. Free world draws people towards itself.
Great. So we're answering the question, the exam question, by saying it's not the end of freedom. But there's no grounds for apathy. And we've got to get better both at reinventing, reinvigorating our own model, but also actually persuading others to embrace our model when faced with alternatives. So I'd just like you all to recognize the excellent contributions we've had from the panelists this morning. And then I think you get your reward with lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.